In the early 20th century, Indigenous communities attempted to mobilize against settler colonialism at the local level. The Canadian government responded by removing their access to the legal and financial tools necessary for a national defense. In 1927, Ottawa added Section 141 to the Indian Act, making it a criminal offense to raise funds for legal challenges against the federal government. Democratic participation was weaponized through the process of enfranchisement. To gain the right to vote, an Indigenous person had to relinquish their legal status and abandon their treaty rights. Strict regulations on travel and a lack of financial resources further prevented First Nations from building regional or national political strategies. This system successfully isolated resistance within individual households and communities. A unified national strategy was legally and financially out of reach for decades. In 1968, the government of Pierre Trudeau came to power with a mandate to reshape the relationship between the state and Indigenous peoples. Their 1969 white paper proposed the total dismantling of Indian status, the closure of the Department of Indian Affairs, and the conversion of reserve lands into private property. It was a policy of immediate assimilation. The proposal triggered an immediate wave of political mobilization across the country. Indigenous leaders rejected the government's vision of equality as a forced erasure of their rights. In response, they authored the Red Paper. This counter-document demanded that the state honor historical treaty promises and recognize Indigenous political authority over their own lands. The 1969 White Paper's push for total erasure instead unified the opposition into a coordinated national movement. To challenge federal policy, leaders established national bodies like the National Indian Brotherhood. This allowed communities to coordinate their efforts on a federal stage for the first time. George Manuel, a Sequapem leader, expanded the movement's reach by developing the Fourth World Theory. He successfully positioned Indigenous rights as a global issue, eventually serving as a spokesperson for oppressed peoples around the world. Years of political lobbying culminated in the Constitution Act of 1982. Section 35 of the Act recognized and affirmed existing Aboriginal and treaty rights, providing them with constitutional protection. The strength of this political organization was tested during the 1990 Meech Lake Accord. Elijah Harper, an NDP member of the Manitoba legislature, used procedural delays to block the amendment because Indigenous groups had not been consulted. Harper's refusal demonstrated that Indigenous nations had become a political force capable of halting federal constitutional reform. While the political fight continued in the legislatures, another front opened within the justice system. The removal of the 1927 funding ban finally allowed for major litigation against the Crown. This map of British Columbia highlights the territory involved in the 1973 Calder case. The Supreme Court ruled that Indigenous title to this land existed prior to colonization and had never been extinguished. In 1990, the Sparrow decision further clarified these rights. The court ruled that constitutional Aboriginal fishing rights take precedence over standard federal and provincial commercial regulations. The 1997 Delgamuukw case forced the courts to accept Indigenous oral histories as admissible evidence, placing them on equal footing with written colonial records. Through these cases, Indigenous groups used the state's own legal system to systematically dismantle colonial assumptions about land ownership and resource management. When legal victories were slow to translate into change on the ground, resistance often shifted to direct action. In 1990, the Oka crisis began as a dispute over a golf course expansion onto a Mohawk burial site. It rapidly escalated into a 78-day armed standoff involving the Canadian military. 5 years later, at Ipperwash Provincial Park, a protest over expropriated burial grounds led to the fatal police shooting of Dudley George. In New Brunswick, the Burnt Church crisis saw violent confrontations between commercial trappers, the Department of Fisheries, and Micmac fishers attempting to exercise their legal harvesting rights. These blockades and standoffs came at a high personal cost. However, they succeeded in bringing Indigenous grievances to the center of national and international media attention. These combined efforts led to major geopolitical changes, such as the 1999 creation of the Autonomous Territory of Nunavut. Such milestones were the result of the state realizing that Indigenous peoples could effectively challenge colonial authority in the legislature, the courts, and the streets. Significant friction remains. The Indian Act is still in effect, and intense disputes over resource extraction and pipeline projects continue to occur on traditional lands. Indigenous sovereignty in Canada is the product of sustained political and legal pressure. Every recognized boundary and legal protection was forcefully reclaimed across decades of coordinated resistance. By utilizing the legislature, the courts, and the barricades, Indigenous peoples engineered a comprehensive challenge to colonial policy, demonstrating that sovereignty must be relentlessly defended.